Picture this, it's 1913. The setting, the vast, frozen, and almost completely isolated Canadian Arctic. Two men walk into this landscape, and they simply vanish. Their disappearance kicks off this epic investigation and a courtroom drama that literally puts two different realities on trial against each other. This is the story of what happens when the law of one world collides with the spirits of another. Mysteries are repeated, not explained. Man, that quote from the anthropologist Hugh Brody just hits the nail on the head here. Because even after this incredible investigation and a landmark trial laid out all the facts, the real mystery, the core question, was still there. Was this an act of murder? Or was it an act of survival?
Okay, so to really get this, you have to understand where this all went down. We're talking about northwestern Canada in 1913. This place isn't just a backdrop, it's a major character in our story. It's a vast, frozen world, so huge it could swallow the entire continent of Europe. This was one of the last places on Earth where its people had little to no contact with the outside world. A land of just immense silence, brutal, unbelievable cold, and a way of life that was completely alien to the men who were about to wander into it. And that's the central question, right? What happened? You have these two Catholic missionaries, full of faith, full of purpose, and they walk right into this landscape. Their goal? To spread the gospel to the Copper Inuit, a group who were among the last Indigenous peoples in North America to meet Europeans. The problem is, they never walked out.
So let's talk about the men at the heart of this. We've got Father Jean-Baptiste Rouvière and Father Guillaume LeRoux. By November 1913, deep in the dark Arctic winter, they were exhausted, they were starving, and they were desperately trying to get back south to their mission base. It seems like the conflict, the thing that really set all this in motion, was a rifle. Now, in a world where a weapon like that is the difference between eating and starving, between life and death, a really bitter argument broke out between the priests and the Inuit men who were guiding them. And the priests, maybe feeling threatened or betrayed, they made a fatal decision. They were going to go it alone, on their own, in the middle of a brutal Arctic winter.
Their journey ended at a place called Bloody Falls, and yeah, the name is tragically fitting, with a long history of violence. That's where two Inuit hunters, Sinnisiak and Uluksuk, found them. We don't know exactly what was said, but we know the encounter was brutal. The priests were killed. And then, in a ritual that would absolutely baffle and horrify the outside world, their livers were eaten.
But here's the thing. You can't just chalk this up to a simple, brutal murder. That's not even close to the full picture. What happened at Bloody Falls was the violent intersection of two completely different realities. To understand what happened, you have to understand the massive, massive gap between how each side saw the world. I mean, just look at this. These weren't just different opinions. They were different universes. On one side, you have the European world, one god, British law, police, courts, and a reliance on preserved food. On the other side, the Copper Inuit world, a world run by spirits and shamans, where murder was a private issue solved by families, where strangers were a source of incredible fear, and where survival depended entirely on what you could hunt that day. And if you need one quote to sum up that entire Inuit worldview, this is it. An Inuit shaman named Awa once said, "We do not believe, we fear." Their spiritual life wasn't about faith in some kind, benevolent God. No, it was a constant, daily effort to navigate a world filled with powerful, dangerous, and totally unpredictable spirits. For them, fear wasn't a weakness. It was a form of respect. It was a tool for survival. So, with the priests officially missing, the outside world finally had to deal with this other reality. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police were called in, and they launched one of the most incredible investigations in Canadian history. The guy in charge was Inspector Denny LaNauze. And here's what made him so good for the job. He understood he couldn't just stomp in there and impose his authority. His single most important decision was hiring an Inuit translator named Ilevinik, who could navigate not just the landscape but the culture. And with that, they set off on this grueling 5,000-mile journey into the total unknown. And I mean, this was a slog. LaNauze and his patrols spent months traveling by dog sled, sleeping in snow houses, living off the land, and just slowly gaining the trust of a local Inuit. They weren't just looking for clues in the snow. They were trying to learn an entirely new language of survival and justice. And then, bit by bit, the frozen land started to give up its secrets. A piece of a blue blanket coat, a Latin prayer book with the name G. LaRoux inside, and then the most damning piece of physical evidence, a priest's cassock, with a name tag still on it, Père Rouvière. Eventually, they found the .44 caliber rifle, and with it, they got the confessions of Sinnisiak and Uluksuk.
Okay, so they found the guys who did it. Case closed, right? Not even close, because finding them was one thing, putting their entire world on trial was something else entirely. The case moved south to a courtroom in Edmonton, and it set the stage for this unprecedented legal battle, the Crown versus what the newspapers were calling the Stone Age. I mean, you have to try and imagine this scene. Sinnisiak and Uluksuk, men who had never seen a train or a horse or a building taller than a tent, are suddenly thrown into the suffocating heat of a Canadian summer courtroom. They're facing a jury of 12 men whose entire idea of law, of life, of death was completely and totally foreign to them. So the defense lawyer, he posed this really simple but powerful question. He basically asked, were they not justified in believing that their lives were in danger? His argument was that in their world, when a stranger is yelling at you and waving a rifle around, that's not just rude. That is a direct, lethal threat. So was this murder or was it self-defense in a land where there are no police to call for help? But the prosecutor, C.C. McCall, he saw it completely differently. For him, this was about one thing, imposing order. He argued that, quote, these two savages, these two cannibals, must be taught respect for the law. His point was that British law had to apply everywhere, whether it's the streets of Toronto or the frozen coast of the Arctic Ocean. No exceptions. And if you need one single moment to see just how massive this cultural gap was, this is it. When Sinnisiak was asked why he ate a piece of the priest's liver, he explained it. He said it wasn't some act of savagery. It was a necessary spiritual act. His grandfather had taught him that this would stop the dead man's angry spirit from coming back to haunt or harm them. To the jury, it was cannibalism. To him, it was common sense, it was spiritual survival. The trial itself was this huge collision, but its verdict? The verdict would send shockwaves through the North that honestly are still being felt today. The aftermath of this case was about way more than just the fate of two men. So the verdict comes in, guilty of murder. The sentence, death by hanging. But then, in a really rare move, the Canadian government stepped in and commuted their sentences. They basically acknowledged that the circumstances here were so unique, so completely out of the ordinary, that the normal rules didn't quite apply. But the real, lasting verdict wasn't for those two men. It was delivered upon their entire culture. This trial, this case, brought the full force of the Southern world, its laws, its economy, its diseases, crashing down on the Copper Inuit, and it changed their way of life forever. And what was the cost of this contact? It was absolutely devastating. Some historians estimate that in certain regions, as many as 90% of the native population died from European diseases like the flu and tuberculosis, sicknesses they had zero natural immunity to. And the transformation was total and it was fast. Rifles replaced bows and arrows, which led to overhunting, and the caribou herds they depended on collapsed. Suddenly, a totally self-sufficient people became dependent on trading posts. Their unique culture of making tools from native copper was replaced by iron, and the old ways of justice were swept aside by Southern police, courts, and prisons. An entire world just faded away. So we're left with this huge question, aren't we? The case of Sinnisiak and Uluksuk forces us to ask, what does justice actually mean when the people involved are operating under fundamentally different moral, spiritual, and legal codes? Who gets to decide what's right, what's wrong, and what's simply necessary to survive?